Welcome to PSI's webinar, Quick, Formative, and Valid Reading Assessment. Hello, I'm Karen McKelvey, PSI's Director of Professional Development, and on behalf of all of us at PSI, we're so pleased to host Dr. Tim Rasinski today. Effective reading instruction and reading intervention requires teachers to monitor students' progress. In addition, diagnosing reading problems requires teachers to isolate and assess reading competencies that are causing these difficulties in the reading. But the problem with many current reading assessments is that they are often long and involved processes, or they examine only one area of reading. So in this webinar, Dr. Tim Rasinski will present and demonstrate a simple yet valid approach to reading assessment, diagnosis, and progress monitoring that takes a minimal amount of time. Audience members will leave the session with an actionable insight and process for assessing their own students' reading. Dr. Rasinski is a professor of literacy education at Kent State University. He has written over 150 articles and has authored, co-authored, or edited over 15 books or curriculum programs on reading education. He is the co-author of the award-winning Fluency program called Fluency First. His scholarly interests include reading fluency and word study, reading in the elementary and middle grades, and readers who struggle. Before I turn the program over to Dr. Rasinski, I want to say that we will be recording this session and it will be archived for further usage by our registrants. If time allows, you can submit questions that will be answered at the end. Utilize the control panel that you can see on the right side of your screen, much like an instant message. Upon completion of the webinar and submission of the evaluation, you will receive a certificate of completion via email. Please expect this certificate within 2 weeks. We will also post this recording of the webinar on the PSI website. And now, PSI is pleased to present Dr. Tim Rasinski.
Thanks, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone, and glad to be with you again on these PSI webinars. Today's topic is on quick, formative, and valid reading assessment. Not really the most romantic of all topics, but one I think that is really quite important. I'd like to share with you my own take on making formative assessments a real place, giving it a real place in our classrooms. Before we begin, I'd like for you, I hope you have a pencil and paper, and I'd like for you, first of all, if you could jot down at the bottom of the screen here, first my email address, trasinski@kent.edu. If you have any questions that don't come up right away at the end of the seminar, feel free to contact me. I do answer my emails. And then secondly, below that, I do have a website, timrasinski.com, and if you'd like to find some follow-up material, some articles that I've written, things that you can put into your own classroom, you can find them at that website, and they're all free. So we're going to start, first of all, with something that I have a lot of fun with. Just for the fun of it, let's do a word ladder. I think many of you out there are familiar with the word ladder. It's a little game that I've been playing around with for a number of years, and I thought we could do one right now here. So first of all, we're going to start with, if you have a piece of paper, write down this word up in the upper left-hand corner, kin, K-I-N, which is a word that means one's family, kindred spirits, people who are related. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to guide you through a series of words, adding, subtracting, changing, rearranging the letters to make a series of words. Okay, so here we go. Take the word kin and add a letter and make a person who is a ruler of a country, somebody who might be married to a queen. That would be what? That would be a king, right? Okay. Now let's change a letter in king and make a word that is a important part of a bird or an airplane. That would be a wing, correct. Now let's change a letter in wing and change the last letter and make a word that describes when a person would catch somebody else's attention by blinking only one eye at them. That would be called a what? Of course, that's a wink. Okay, a couple more. Change a letter in wink, the first letter, and make a color word. Kind of a reddish kind of word, a reddish kind of color. That would be pink. Excellent. Take away a letter from pink and make a word that is a metal object used for holding two pieces of cloth together. That would be a pin. Okay, almost done. Change the vowel in pin and make a word that is it's a kind of joke that it plays off of words that have multiple different possible meanings. That would be a pun. Excellent. Change the last letter in pun to make a word that it would be a young dog. That would be a pup. And finally, add one letter to pup and make a word that is a mechanism for drawing oil or water out of the ground. That would be a pump. Very good. Kin to pump. Or let's do it backwards. We would end with pumpkin. Put the first and last words together. So happy Halloween to all of you out there. Might be something you might want to share with your students tomorrow or sometime in the next few days. A lot of fun. First and last words go together in word ladders. If you're actually interested, here's a little bit of self-promotion, but I do have several books out there, word ladder books, that you can find on Amazon or at scholastic.com. But let's move on to assessment. Why assessment? Why is assessment important? Well, there's actually several reasons why, and I think we all know what they are. First is simply to identify students who are doing well and those who are not doing so well, particularly in this area, reading, to separate those kids. Now, we can do some other separations. Our states to separate school districts by their performance. Our schools themselves separate teachers by those who might be more effective than others. But for our purposes here, it's identifying those students who particularly are having some difficulty in learning to read here. Once we do that, we can take it to the next step. If we can at least separate those children out who are struggling reading, the next thing would be, where's the problem? You know, reading is a multifaceted task, and so with those children who are not doing so well, we'd want to diagnose their strengths and, more importantly, perhaps their concerns, and try to remediate those concerns. You know, if a child is having problems in word recognition, teaching them remediating comprehension may not be the most effective use of their time or our time. We also use assessment to monitor progress, to see if kids are actually making progress due to our instruction, our intervention efforts there. You know, the famous quote by Albert Einstein, you know, the definition of insanity is, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We don't want you know, we want to change our instruction if we find that our instruction is not having the desired effect. So that idea of progress monitoring, making sure our kids are making progress here. Three major reasons why we assess children here. So let's change it now and talk about the principles of assessment. You know, what are some of the things we should be looking for in a good assessment approach, especially in reading? The first, if you've ever taken a course in design and implementation of testing, test and measurements, they talk about validity and reliability. Simply that a test should measure what it's supposed to measure, obviously. That's pretty, you know, kind of a no-brainer. And also that you get reliable results. So if you gave a test on Monday and you got certain results, and you gave a very similar test on Tuesday, you should get pretty much the same results. If they vary widely, then which of the results do you believe, Mondays or Tuesdays? So we want it to be reliable or consistent. We want it to involve authentic reading. You know, again, it's kind of a no-brainer, but again, in our field, we've had examples replete with reading assessments that don't involve real reading. Back when I was a kindergartner, or first grader, I still remember children in my class, including myself, being asked to walk a balance beam. And those kids who did not do well in the balance beam, they were sent to the remedial reading class. Apparently there was some sort of theory or correlation between those two things, reading, walking a balance beam and reading, but is that authentic reading? Hardly there. So we really want to involve real reading. And of course we wanted to focus on those components of reading. We want to make it comprehensive. Reading is not just recognizing words, it's also knowing what the words mean, it's reading fluently, it's reading with good comprehension, and these should be aspects of a good assessment. All of these aspects of reading should be parts that we assess on a regular basis. And then it needs to be sensitive to changes in students' reading proficiency. We have some good tests out there, no denying that, but sometimes, you know, they're not sensitive enough to pick up small changes, say from one month to the next. And that's what we want. We want something that's pretty sensitive to see if there's gains over a relatively short period of time. And what I mean by a short period of time, I'm talking about, say, a month to 6 weeks or so, not testing kids every single week. And then finally, not quite finally, but next to finally, is teacher observation. You know, a lot of the assessments we give kids, they're silent reading tests, and you know, the kids are filling in the bubbles and that sort of thing. I respect the fact that teachers are good observers, and I want teachers to be able to observe children reading, and this means that a lot of good assessment means oral reading. Children need to be reading orally so that we can listen and observe the children while they're actually in the process of reading itself. So I'll trust teachers' good analytical skills. And then finally, it needs to be time efficient. You know, again, we do have some really excellent assessments out there, but you know, they take an hour, 90 minutes or so. Those of you who might be familiar with an informal reading inventory, I teach that in my diagnosis course, informal reading inventories, and they're great assessments, but the problem is they take anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes to administer on a one-to-one basis. What teacher in the world has that kind of time to devote to testing children, especially if they would have to do every child 2 or 3 times a year? It needs to be as quick as possible, and when I talk about quick, I'm talking about minutes, not hours here. So these are the principles that guide me in trying to make good assessments that we can use in our classrooms there. So earlier I talked about this idea of assessment needs to be comprehensive, that is, the different competencies related to reading. What are those competencies? And I'm going to go back to the National Reading Panel. They identified several that I think make good sense for us when we're trying to assess kids' reading. Let's go through them very quickly, and then what I'm going to do is share with you how each of these can be assessed in a fairly simple way here. First of all, word recognition or word decoding, or what some people would call phonics, the ability to recognize words. That's the first one there. Obviously, you can't read if you can't decode the words. That's something we want to be able to assess in our children. Fluency, and in particular word recognition automaticity, refers to the ability to recognize words, not just accurately, but so effortlessly or automatically that we can devote our attention to the more important task in reading, which is comprehension. Rather than have to sound out every word that we encounter, we want kids to automatically recognize words so that their attention can be given to comprehension. A second competency related to fluency is what we call prosody or expression. There's a growing body of evidence that says that students who, when they read orally, read with good expression, are also students who, when they read silently, read with good comprehension. There's a strong correlation between the two. And if you just think about it, in order to read with expression, you have to be monitoring the meaning of the text as you read it. So again, we're looking at that as a sort of a newcomer to this area of assessment, but still something that we think is pretty important. And then we have vocabulary or word meaning, and of course that, what good is it to be able to sound out a word if you don't know what the word means? Then it's just a nonsense word. So we want to make sure that our students not only can sound out a word, but also know what the word means. Can they define the word within the context of the passage? And then finally, the goal of reading is comprehension, text understanding. Do students actually make meaning out of the text that they read? All of these are competencies that are clearly important in reading, and we want to, any one of those can cause problems in reading. And so if we assume that children we're working with children who have difficulty in reading, our goal would be to try to identify as precisely as possible which one of these areas is giving them the most difficulty. So that's where we can put our intervention efforts. So let's start first of all with word recognition decoding, word recognition accuracy, decoding accuracy, the ability to sound out words. Here's the step-by-step procedure. And again, I know you can't write these all down, but as Karen mentioned, this is archived in the PSI library, so you can have access to this. And again, I don't think it's anything new. I think we've all experienced this approach to assessment before. First of all, what we do is we have a student read a grade level passage out loud in his or her normal voice. So if you're working with a second grader, find a second grade passage. A fifth grader, find a fifth grade passage, and present it to the child. Now, where do you find these passages? I would say just out of the reading program that the students are using, or something similar to that. As a student reads this passage out loud, the second bullet here is your job is to have a copy of this text in front of you, or if you recorded the child's reading, to wait until you're alone and you can listen to the child's reading. Mark any errors that they make on the reading. That is, if the word in the text was horse and said whose, I draw a slash through that word and indicate it was an error. And also, I want to point out it should be an uncorrected error. So if the student said horse, the word was horse, and the child said hose, and then immediately went back, no, that's horse, that would not be an error. You want the uncorrected errors. You mark all of those. And then third, simply determine the percentage of words read accurately. Simply, it's the total number of words in the passage, subtract from that the number of errors, and divide that by the total number of words. Sounds kind of complicated, but it's not. Let's say, for example, we have a passage with 100 words, okay, and the child makes 6 errors. So that would be 100 words minus 6, or 94, divided by the total number of words, which was 100. Total would be 94%, right? Pretty simple to do. You can do it easily on a calculator. So what do you do with that percentage? Well, what we need to do is have a way of interpreting it. What we know is that scores, or word recognition scores, between 92 to 98% words read accurately indicate adequate word recognition. They're doing pretty well, what we would call instructional level. So if I was a second grade teacher about this time of year, I'd be expecting most of my second graders to be reading somewhere 92 and 98% of the words they read encountered on a second grade passage read accurately. What if they did better, 99% or 100? Well, that indicates they're doing really well, and we're doing a pretty good job of teaching phonics or word recognition to the students. Our concern needs to be raised, though, when we have students who are below that 92%. Suppose you had a student who perhaps got 88%, 89% of the words read accurately on that grade level passage. That sounds pretty high, 88%, but it's not high enough. What the research has told us is that when you get down to 91, 90%, those having that many errors in a passage as you read it is going to cause comprehension problems. So the sweet spot is that 92 to 98% that we're looking for. And again, the thing is, what we'd be looking for then is improvement over time. Now, if I had a student who is reading with 92% accuracy right now in October, 2 months from now, right before we break for the winter break in December, I might have the child read a similar passage. Hopefully that percentage will go up to 94 or 95%. You're looking for progress over time. If, on the other hand, the student is down in that 88, 89%, what that might suggest is that we need to provide more intensive instruction in word recognition, and possibly even give that child easier reading to do, so they're not getting frustrated, encountering frustration as they read. So word recognition accuracy, we've known this for a number of years. Read a passage at grade level, look for the percentage of words read accurately, and that sweet spot is that 92 to 98% range there that you're looking for. What about fluency? In particular, word recognition automaticity. Automaticity, as I mentioned before, is that ability to recognize words so effortlessly that, we're not really sounding the words out. They're automatically recognized, and our attention is drawn to the meaning, not only of the words, but to the passage itself. If you read this first line with me, word recognition automaticity is measured by reading rate or reading speed. You didn't have to stop and sound out those words. Neither did I. They were just automatically recognized. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that. The way we measure automaticity is simply by reading rate or speed. Those of you who are familiar with DIBELS or Ames Web, the oral reading fluency component, know that this is one of the major ways of measuring automaticity. We also know that automaticity is highly correlated with reading comprehension. Students who, when they generally read faster, generally have better comprehension, and students, as they tend to read slower, their comprehension begins to be compromised. So reading speed is really important. And the way we do that is by having our students read a passage well, I'll go back, I'll get to it in a minute, but basically we have them read for a minute, we count the number of words read correctly. But before I leave this page, one of the things I want to share with you is this big caveat. I have it in red. Reading rate or speed is a way of measuring automaticity, but it's not the way that we teach automaticity. And I just want to harp on that for a minute or two if I could, because I see that all the time. Well-meaning teachers, well-meaning school administrators, have this notion that, well, we'll get our kids to read faster and that'll improve their fluency, and it really doesn't. It just gets kids to read fast, and when they do that, they're not paying attention to meaning. We want children to become fast readers, but we want them to become fast the way all of us became fast readers, or relatively fast readers, and that was just by lots and lots and lots of reading. Speed comes up on its own. It's a consequence of automaticity. It's not the cause. So how do we actually measure this automaticity then? Okay, well, first of all, what we do is we use that same reading that was done for word recognition accuracy. Okay, so that second grade passage for a second grader, and we have them do the same reading. They're still doing the same reading as they did earlier. The only thing we add to it is the stopwatch. We take a stopwatch or a clock watch with a second hand, and when they start reading, we press the button, and after 1 minute, we mark where they're at in their reading, the number in 1 minute. So put a little slash mark after about a minute of reading. And then we simply, the third bullet, calculate the number of words they read correctly in that minute time. And that gives us a score we call WCPM, or words correct per minute. And then we compare that words correct per minute score against established norms for grade levels and time of year. One of the things we do know that is that as children get older, go from one grade to the next, their reading speed does tend to increase, at least in the elementary grades here. So what we would be looking at is something like this. This comes out of my book called the 3-Minute Reading Assessments. So again, I'm doing this webinar right now. It's October, and if I were working with a second grader, what I would be looking for is a reading rate somewhere between 30 to 80 words correct per minute, the fall score. If the child is, right in the middle, 50 or 60, that's excellent. But if they're getting closer to that 30 words or even below 30 words per minute, that's, again, when the flags go up. They may be reading every word correctly, but why are they reading so slowly? And the reason is because they're stopping at every second, third, fourth word, sounding it out. They can do it, but there's a price to be paid, and the price is they're slower, but there's also comprehension. It begins to suffer as well. So notice that as we go from fall to winter with second grade, notice what happens. The reading speed should increase quite dramatically, actually, and by the springtime, we should be looking for a range of 70 to 130 words correct per minute there. And notice also when we go from from first grade to second to third to fourth, the reading speed increases as well here. I might add, however, not only should we be looking for children who score well below that 30 words correct per minute, but also kids who are well above the top number. Again, if I had a second grader right now who maybe is reading at 110 words correct per minute on a second grade passage, and their comprehension isn't quite where it should be, I might be hypothesizing that maybe they're just reading too fast, and one of my interventions would be to get that particular child to slow down just a bit here. So we can actually be disfluent by reading too fast, and actually we're seeing more and more of that with all of this emphasis on reading speed. So automaticity is measured by by measuring reading speed. It's a measure of automaticity. Okay, there's a second aspect of reading fluency, and that's called prosody, or expression. Prosody is a linguistic term, and what it refers to is the melodic part of oral reading. If I think about somebody who's a fluent reader or fluent speaker, it's not somebody who reads fast. It's somebody who uses their voice to make meaning. They get loud, they get soft, they get fast, they get slow. They have dramatic pauses in their reading. And what that does is that shows us that they're actually adding meaning. They're making meaning in their voices they read here. Again, what the research shows us in the last 10 years or so has been those students at almost every grade level who, when they read orally, read with good expression, good phrasing, good emphasis, good confidence. When they read silently, they tend to be our best comprehenders. And those students who, when they read orally, are much more tentative, not much volume, not much confidence, more of a monotone, those children tend to be our less able readers, the ones who struggle in reading. So how do we measure this prosody thing? Well, we're going straight back to that same reading that we had the child do earlier. They read a passage, and from that passage, the second grade passage, we measured their word recognition accuracy and their word recognition automaticity. We can use the same passage for their prosody. So bullet number 1, use the same reading that was done. So you can see where this is quite efficient. And what we want to do then is simply listen to the child's reading and measure it against some sort of rubric. I have a multi-dimensional scale that I'll share with you in just a second here. And then we do the rating, and then we compare the student's score against some recommended norms, their prosody score against some norms there. So what it requires us as teachers to do, or diagnosticians, is simply be good listeners. And teachers are excellent at that. We listen to kids read all the time. We know what good reading sounds like. So we have that child that reads orally for us. We record their reading. That's probably the best way of doing it. And then we measure it against this scale here, this multi-dimensional fluency scale here. If you look at the top, what I did was I broke this up, and I should give credit to this. This was developed by my colleague, Jerry Zutel, and myself 20-some years ago. And teachers have been using it ever since, and with good results here. If you look at the top, we broke this prosody or expression down into four parts. First is expression and volume. Is the student reading with good expression and confidence and volume? Second would be phrasing. Good readers read chunk text. They don't read word by word. So they're phrasing and intonation. Third would be smoothness. Do they continually read through the passage, or are there frequent stops and starts and regressions and that? Or is it a smooth reading? And finally, pace. Pace is similar to reading rate in a sense that we want a good, reasonably well-paced reading, but again, we don't want something that's too fast-paced. We want something that is more conversational. So that's across the top, and then if you look on the left-hand side, the left column, you'll notice we have 4 ratings of those competencies. 1 would be the lowest level of performance, and 4 would be the highest level of performance in each of those there. So what you're looking at then would be scoring children, expression and volume. Do I give this child a 1, 2, 3, or 4? Phrasing and intonation, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Smoothness, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and pace, 1, 2, 3, or 4. It sounds like it's a lot of work, and it does require good, close listening, but as I mentioned earlier, teachers are really good at this here. So what we're looking at then, if you want to get a score here, the highest possible score a child would get would be a 16, right? 4 scores of 4 in each of those categories, and the lowest possible score would be a 4, a 1 in each of those categories. So what we'd be looking for then would be a score, generally speaking, I would say somewhere around 10 or better in terms of a total score. would indicate good prosody, appropriate expression on grade level material. Scores below 10 would tend to indicate that prosody or expression is not quite where it should be. And so, again, this might indicate to us something we might want to be working on with this child. There. How do you develop prosody and expression? Well, you give children a chance to rehearse what they read. You give them a chance to listen to good expressive reading. You know, when teachers read to their children, that's one of the things we should be talking about, is how expressive we are in our reading with our kids there. So good assessment. And what I like particularly about this one is that I've seen teachers around the country kind of adapt this. They would take this chart, make it into a big chart to put in the classroom, and then have children rate their own reading there. So they begin to develop that sensitivity to what counts as expressive reading here. So simple scales such as that is a way of measuring prosody. Now we move on to reading comprehension, and how do we measure that? We measure comprehension simply by listening to kids read, and when they're done reading that passage, we ask them to tell us what they remembered about their reading here. What do you remember? And then what we do is we score their retelling against a descriptive rubric that we develop. And again, what it requires us as teachers to be is that good assessor, or that good observer, to see how well they're retelling the passage here. So again, here's the rubric from my book called The 3-Minute Reading Assessments. It's based on a 1 to 6 scale, 1 being the lowest and 6 being the highest. So if a student has no recall, minimum recall, they read the passage, we take the passage away from them, we ask them to tell us, what do you remember? If they can only give us a fact or two, we give them a score of 1. If they can give us a number of facts, but they're relatively unrelated, kind of random, we give them a score of 2. More than just 1 or 2 facts. Scores of 1 or 2 would indicate frustration level reading. Now a score of 3 would be if they can give us the main idea and some supporting detail, and a score of 4 would be if they can give us a pretty robust set of details, not necessarily every detail, but quite a number to support the main idea. Scores of 3 or 4 indicate right where kids should be, instructional level. And then scores of 5 or 6 indicate kids who are doing really good with comprehension. Score of 5 basically is a comprehensive summary of the passage that they read, and a score of 6 would be actually going beyond the passage itself. Where what the kids would do would be to expand. This story reminds me of another one I've read, or this happened to me. When kids can actually go beyond the actual text itself and make connections to their own lives or something they're reading, they're really giving evidence of strong comprehension there. And again, this is what we'd be looking for. Scores of 5 or 6 usually indicate what we would call independent level or strong reading levels there. So we simply listen to kids read and then listen to their retelling. Finally, vocabulary. How do we measure vocabulary word meaning? We know the kids can sound out certain words, but do they know what they mean? Well, the way we do this is pretty simple here. What you do is you find 10 grade level words for your student. And you can find these just in a reading textbook for 2nd or 3rd grade. And again, teachers use their best judgment. What would you consider an appropriate 2nd or 3rd or 4th grade level word? Get 10 of them. And then what we do is we simply provide students with the words. We show them the word itself, so you don't have to sound it out, and we actually tell them the word. So what we ask the students to do is to provide us with a definition of the word or some other evidence that they know what this words mean. Can they use it in the context of a sentence or two? And what we do is we have 10 words like that. It doesn't take more than a few minutes to do. We score each word as follows. If the student can give us a pretty good, evidence that they have good understanding of the word, we give them 10 points. If they have partial understanding, they're kind of there, but they're not quite, we'd give them 5 points. And if you have some students who either give you an incorrect answer, or they say, I don't know what that means, or obviously their understanding of the word is just not there, we would give them 0 points. So we can give them full credit partial credit, which would be 5 points or no credit. So we have 10 words. Each word would be worth 10 points, and our interpretation is right there at the bottom. A score of 80 to 100, if the student knows 8, 9, or 10 of those words from that list, that indicates they have a strong vocabulary for that particular grade level. So again, our second grader who gets 8 out of 10 words correct, they can provide a reasonable definition. Independent, strong vocabulary. 60 to 70 or 75%, that would indicate instructional level. And then scores below 60 indicate frustration level. And what that suggests then is that students have difficulty with comprehension, and the problem with comprehension is they don't understand the critical words in that passage, their frustration level. So again, what that suggests to us is that it's an area we need to work on with these children if they're doing poorly in vocabulary and it's causing problems in comprehension there. So that's it in a nutshell. In what we have our students do then is they read a passage. Now here's an example from a couple years ago. You see in the upper left-hand corner, we have a student by the name of Fran. It's September, and she read this passage for us, a grade 3 passage. She read it out loud in her best voice, and you can see that we put lines, a little slash mark in those words that she read that she did not correct. She read incorrectly, and she did not correct. So on the first line, she missed Quinn and awesome. Second line, she miscued on deserves and award, and so on. Also notice that about 5 or 6 lines down, there's a little bracket at the word musical. That's where she was at the end of 60 seconds. So again, from this one passage, she read it for us. We measured her number of words, her word recognition accuracy, her automaticity by indicating where she was at the end of 60 seconds, and then she did a retelling for us on this particular passage, and then we scored it on that rubric. So let's do a couple here. These are all children in a reading clinic from a few years ago, and this is, if you look at the bottom here, I'm just going to walk you guys through this and see if we can identify where these children need help. The first one is Fran. She's referred to us at the University Reading Clinic because her parents were worried about her reading. So we had her read a couple passages, and this is one of them, and this is her performance. Word recognition accuracy. She read 206 words correctly out of a total of 226, so a percentage of 91%. Her fluency score, her automaticity, was 48 words correct per minute, and her multidimensional fluency scale, her expression, was a total of 4. Her comprehension is 1.5. If you recall, that was in the frustration level. And then finally, her vocabulary score was 85. Here. So let's walk through this real quickly here. First of all, word recognition accuracy, is that a if you recall, I said 92 to 98% was your sweet spot. And here she's a third grader, 91% accuracy. I mean, it's a problem. It's a bit of a concern for that particular child here. How about, not huge though, she's pretty close to where she should be there. How about automaticity, 48 words correct per minute for a third grader? If you go back, in fact, you'll notice that third graders in the fall should be reading somewhere between, if I'm not mistaken, 50 to 110 words correct per minute. So again, she's kind of on the low end of that. So she can decode words, but she does it relatively slowly. Her fluency scale score is 4, and if you remember, I said 10 was sort of the cutoff there, so she's well below that. So these are all problems that are probably causing that low score in comprehension. How about vocabulary? Is that a problem? Doesn't seem to me. If you recall, we talked about 80 to 90% as being strong vocabulary, and her score was 85%. So knowing that Fran is having problems in reading comprehension, what it would tell me is what I want to work on with Fran instructionally would be to intervene in the area of word recognition, accuracy, and automaticity, those foundational skills that the Common Core talk about here. But not all children are like Fran. We have other kids, and so let me move on. Here's 3 other ones. Let's walk through them very quickly here. The next one is Jeff. again, a third grader. And again, he comes to us because his parents or teacher felt they were having some problems. Now, if we look at word recognition accuracy, 97%. That's excellent. There, he really can knock off those words really well, so that's not a problem. His fluency automaticity score looks on surface pretty good too, 140. But if you recall, I said at the beginning of third grade should be somewhere between 50 to 110 words per minute. He's well above that. And that might suggest to me that maybe what we want, what he needs to do is slow down a bit. You'll notice also that if you look to the right, his vocabulary score is excellent, so he knows what the words mean. But notice also that his fluency, multidimensional fluency scale score is 7, particularly in that expression and volume and phrasing. If you're reading as fast as you can, you're not going to be able to phrase the text very well. And you can see that with that score of 1. There, he's just blowing right through the text as quickly as he can, and that results in a comprehension score of 2, which is low, but it's not due to his lack of knowledge. I don't think it's due to the fact that he's got this wrong-headed idea about reading, that it's reading way too as fast as you can. He's probably gotten too much emphasis on that in the classroom. So the first thing we probably want to do is slow him down, get him to read with more expression that reflects the meaning. Harriet. Well, Harriet, again, is a third grader, and you can see that her word recognition accuracy is strong, 99%. Her automaticity score is good, 104, almost to the topmost number we were looking for, 110. Her multidimensional fluency scale score is 13, which is pretty well above that benchmark of 10. But notice her vocabulary, 45%. Although she can decode the words and decode them accurately and automatically, she's having trouble figuring out the meaning. And what that is causing then is comprehension problems. There are problems with comprehension. How can you comprehend something if you're having difficulty with every fifth word knowing the meaning to it? It's going to impact your reading. So with Harriet, rather than slow her down, what we want to do is give some emphasis on vocabulary. They're develop on her strategies for making meaning and some of the great activities that we know for developing vocabulary, such as tapping into the Greek and Latin roots that are the basis for so many of our English words. Now Jack, if you look at Jack there at the bottom, again, his comprehension score is 2, which indicates kind of at the low end. But again, if you look at his other scores there, word recognition accuracy, that's strong, 94%. Vocabulary, 90%, that's strong. Automaticity, 90 words correct per minute, that's right, in that sweet spot. But again, what we see here with Jack is a score of 8 on the multidimensional fluency scale. In particular, he got a score of 1 in expression and volume. As I recall, when Jack read for us, he was really didn't have a lot of confidence. He read almost in a mumble voice. And although he read, accurately and automatically, it was really soft like this. It was, and his head was down. And it was like, he didn't believe that he knew how to read very well. So again, with Jack, our intervention is going to be different. All these children are having difficulty in comprehension, but in his case, it would be to get him to read with greater volume, greater confidence, and one of the best ways of developing that is rehearsal. Practice something over and over again until you can read it with great expression and confidence here. And then finally, we have one more student. All these students so far, from Fran all the way up to Jack, the problem seems to be in one of these sub-competencies, whether it's word recognition accuracy, vocabulary, automaticity, or prosody or expression. But Catherine is a little bit different here. Catherine, if you look at her scores, you're asking yourself, what the heck's going on here? She reads with perfect accuracy, 100%. Her vocabulary, she knows what all the words mean, or pretty close to. Her automaticity score, words correct per minute, is right in that sweet spot. And notice her expression score, her multidimensional fluency score, 13. Out of all the 5 kids that we looked at, hers is about the highest. She reads with expression and confidence, but look at her comprehension score, 1.5 on that rubric there. We said a score of 1 or 2 was indicative of frustration level reading, and she's right there. What's going on? we don't see these children very often, but they do exist. You know, if you listen to them read, if you observe them, you say, where's the problem? And the problem doesn't show up until they start talking about, you ask them to talk about what they read and they don't recall. They don't understand what they've read. I think Catherine is a passive reader. And we do see these children. They're the ones that, you know, as I mentioned, they're like you and I when we read late at night after a long day at work. You know, we've all had that experience where, you know, we're going to read for a few minutes before turning in, and you know we're reading the words, but the gears aren't meshing up there in our brain. We're so tired. And what do? We read again and again, you know, after a couple minutes of this, we finally give up and just say, okay, I'll pick this up tomorrow. But I think with Catherine, this is what happens all the time. She needs intervention that focuses on comprehension. There's some of those great strategies that we know, such as, you know, making predictions. What do you think this story is going to be about? Compare and contrast. How is this story like the story we read last week? Visual imagery. What do you visualize when you read this particular story? These are strategies that good readers use almost intuitively, but children like Catherine, these passive readers, not so much, and we need to help them develop those strategies there. So that's the beauty of this kind of an assessment. It's quick, it only takes minutes, and from this few minutes of reading, you know, I'm not going to tell you it's the very best assessment ever, because we're kind of getting a sample of their reading, but from the sample, we can give it an idea of how they're doing in so many of these areas: word recognition accuracy, vocabulary, automaticity, expression or multidimensional fluency, and then comprehension here. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about this, I do have a couple books out. They're published by Scholastic. They're called 3-Minute Reading Assessments. One of the other features that's nice about these books is they're relatively cheap. If you buy some of these informal reading assessment books, they'll sell for over $100. This, I believe, is for $12, $14, which, you know, Nancy and myself, my co-author, we try to make sure that it was something that was affordable for teachers. And with this one book, you can assess all the kids in your classroom. So that's it in a nutshell. Maybe it's more than 3 minutes, but I don't think it's going to take you more than 5 or 6 minutes to assess a child. And knowing it doesn't take a lot of time, we can do this on a regular basis, once every 2 or 4 months, to make sure that our kids are making progress. That's my take on it. And well, I'm going to turn it back over to Karen right now and see if there's any questions that I might be able to answer. I thank you for tuning in, and I hope you found my comments helpful. If I went too fast, please feel free to go back to the PSI website, and you can listen to this again. And if you have any other questions after we sign off, again, my email address is there at the beginning, trasinski@kent.edu. Karen, are you still there?
I still am. Thank you so much. We would like to address a few questions. We had one that came in. It says, if the student reading the passage over is the student reading the passage over 3 times in order to score for each area, or are you scoring all areas with 1 time reading through the passage?
Great question. And again, it gets back to the issue of time. The way we do it is they just read it once. If you wanted to, you could give them a chance to read it, to rehearse it, read it silently, but you're doing all the scoring on 1 reading. So that 1 reading, you're counting the number of errors, or marking the errors, you're determining the number of words you read correctly in that first minute of reading, and then, of course, they're doing you're measuring their expression and their retelling all from that one reading only. Again, there's some downside to that, but again, what we want to do is keep this relatively quick so that it's not an overwhelming task for the teacher or for the student.
Okay, here's another one. Are the rubrics you presented in the assessment books?
Yeah. If you look in the back of these books, there's actually a detailed description of how to use them, and there's actually some charts where you can actually lay out the student scores here. We've had really good luck with using these, not only in our reading clinic, but schools around the country have used them with good success.
Okay, another one here, Tim. How often should students be assessed on their reading, in your opinion?
Great question, because we've got kind of gone assessment mad in this country here. Um, you know, I don't think weekly is a good idea, because I don't think children change that much from one week to the next in their reading ability, that we would notice changes in their reading. And the reason why I say that is because, again, well-meaning schools, administrators, and teachers do some of that where they assess kids every week, and I just don't think you're going to get a valid or a reliable assessment. I think we should be looking at every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks or so. That gives the student enough time to respond to the intervention, and it doesn't overwhelm the kid or the teacher with too much testing. So 6 weeks minimum or maximum, I guess. No sooner than every 6 weeks. And the kids who are doing well, probably not even that long. Maybe once every semester, or once beginning of the year, mid-year, and end of year, to make sure they're making progress. But I do want to raise my concern about this too much testing that we do children, because what happens is when we test kids, they begin to take on the understanding that the test is what it need to try to improve my reading speed score, so that's what I'm going to be working on there. And that, of course, we don't want that. We want good kids reading for good comprehension.
Okay, thank you. Another great question. When diagnosing students with reading difficulties, in which of the competencies that you mentioned do they most commonly have difficulty?
Oh, yeah, another good one. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's those foundational skills. In fact, I would refer the person who had this question to the work of Sheila Valencia. She and her colleagues at the University of Washington in Seattle have been looking at children who do poorly on these state reading exams, these assessments that we give kids all around the country, and basically asking the question, the kids who do poorly on these, where's the problem? And what she has found is that 75 to 90% of the kids, depending upon how you look at the data, but 75 to 90% of these children have problems in the area of word recognition, accuracy, vocabulary, or fluency. But they cause problems in comprehension there. So to me, what it says then is that, if we really want to make a mark on improving apparently, especially the kids we worry about, if we want to improve their outcomes, we need to give more emphasis to those foundational skills. Fluency, one I'm big on, but also the knowledge of words, the ability to read words accurately and with good meaning as well. That seems to be an area that seems to be tripping up many of our kids who struggle in reading.
Okay, Tim, before I ask you the final question, could you advance the slide one more time, because your contact information and hours will show up.
What did I do?
There. Well, I think it's good.
Okay. Oh, you know what happened, Karen? I don't have your final slide.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Okay, you've got one more question. Would you recommend any other forms of reading assessment?
Yeah, I would. There's a lot of great assessments out there. The developmental reading assessment's one of my favorite. It was developed by one of my colleagues from Ohio State, Joetta Beaver. It's an excellent assessment, and informal reading inventories are as well. What I really like about my approach here is that it is relatively quick. I always say time given to testing is time taken away from teaching. So often you can think of this approach, what we talked about right here, sort of a way of screening those children who are, need perhaps the more thorough assessment, a deeper assessment. But use that the other assessments, whether it's running records or informal reading inventories or the qualitative reading inventory or the developmental reading assessment, save those for those children that you worry most about, because you're going to get more information from those. But the problem with those is they do take a bit more time to administer, and I don't think we just have that much time. If we have all these instructional priorities we need to deal with. Okay. Are we still there?
Okay, I'm sorry. We were My tech person here is trying to work to put up the screen we were talking about, so that final slide is there now.
Okay.
With contact information. So we've reached the end of our questions. There was one final one asking whether there was going to be a download of your PowerPoint. I will say this, we are recording this webinar, and one can go in later on to the PSI website and see the PowerPoint again. We hope you find that helpful. But we have reached the end of our time now, and we have a small change in our normal procedure. Instead of you automatically and instantly receiving a survey, we are going to be emailing a survey questionnaire to you within 24 or 48 hours. We would ask you to complete it and submit it, and then you will receive your certificate of completion. So finally, on behalf of all of us at PSI and Dr. Rasinski, thank you for attending this webinar.